Imagine, a January morning in 14th century England. A frosty breath has seized the fields, streams have turned to ice, and the only sound in the air is the crunch of snow underfoot. The sun rises lazily, as if it, too, is in no hurry to fight the cold. How did common peasants live in such conditions, without knowledge of stoves, radiators, or double-glazed windows? We often think their lives were an endless torture of cold. But in reality, peasants possessed knowledge that we have long since lost. Their homes were true organisms, where every little detail, from the walls to the straw on the floor, worked toward a single goal: to preserve warmth. Today, we will uncover 12 secrets of warmth from the Middle Ages. And each one is a small miracle of human ingenuity. From the outside, a peasant's cottage might seem pitiful: walls made of poles interwoven with branches, wattle, plastered with a mixture of clay, straw, sand, and manure, daub. To a modern person, such a dwelling seems temporary, fragile. But the peasants knew, these walls could preserve life. Clay possessed a remarkable property. During the day, it greedily absorbed the heat from the hearth, like a boulder warmed by the summer sun. And at night, the walls would begin to breathe, slowly releasing the accumulated warmth back. If you pressed your palm against them, you could feel a faint but tangible warmth. The house seemed to be alive, helping its owners fight the frost. The secret was in the mixture itself: straw prevented the clay from cracking, sand provided density, and manure served as a natural binder. As a result, the walls became not only strong but also breathable. Moisture slowly escaped through them, preventing dampness from settling inside. The smoke, which didn't exit through a chimney but swirled under the roof, played a special role. It permeated the beams and straw, settling on the walls like a black shield. The smell of soot was thick and pervasive, but it was protective. Mold couldn't take hold, insects avoided the smoke-blackened areas, and even the roof lasted longer. Archaeologists studying the remains of medieval dwellings find characteristic traces of soot-covered clay. This confirms that smoke was used as a natural antiseptic. Moreover, these homes retained more heat than castles with stone walls. Paradoxically, peasants in winter often lived more warmly than knights in their stone halls. But the walls were only the shell. The real warmth was born in the center, by the fire. The hearth was the soul of the houses. It was located in the middle of the hut, not against a wall, as in castles, but right in the center. This decision was practical: the heat spread in all directions, turning the entire room into a shared nest of warmth. In the evening, the whole family would gather around the hearth. Children would hold their hands out to the fire, women would spin wool, and men would mend harnesses or sharpen knives. In a cauldron over the flames, a stew of barley and turnips simmered. Steam rose to the ceiling, humidifying the air and making it feel softer. Even the food itself became part of the heating system. The hot cauldron continued to radiate heat long after the fire had died down. The firelight cast golden patches on the walls, and shadows danced, turning the cottage into a theater. For the children, these shadows were real fairy tales. This is how the legends that were passed down through generations were born. In peasant homes, the fire was considered sacred. It was never allowed to be completely extinguished. The woman of the house, who was responsible for the hearth, was seen as the guardian of the family's warmth and life. In some regions of Europe, the hearth was even revered as a household spirit, to whom the first pieces of food were offered. The hearth was not only a heater and a kitchen. It was a clock. When the embers died down, it meant it was time to go to sleep. When they were still glowing in the morning, the peasants rejoiced, for the night was over, and the warmth had been preserved. But to keep the heart of the home from dying out, the peasants devised a special trick. Kindling a new fire in winter was an arduous task. Sparks from flint often went out, and hands would freeze. So, the peasants came up with a clever solution. Every evening, the densest and hottest embers were raked into a pile and covered with a thick layer of ash. This gray blanket cut off the air but didn't completely smother the fire. The embers smoldered slowly, as if sleeping until morning. At dawn, one only had to rake away the ash with a stick, and crimson sparks would glow underneath. A couple of dry splinters, and the flame was born again. This technique was so reliable that it survived in European villages until the 19th century. Sometimes, embers were even carried to neighboring houses. If a fire did go out, a woman could send her child to the neighbors for a living coal. This was considered a normal act of helping one another. Thus, the fire in the cottage never truly died. It only dozed under its ashen blanket. But warmth was hidden not only in the hearth and walls. It also lived overhead. A roof of straw and reeds seemed fragile. But for a peasant, it was the perfect insulator. A thick layer of stalks trapped air, turning it into thermal insulation. Half a meter of straw retained heat better than stone. The smoke that filled the house permeated the roof. As a result, the straw became stronger, lasted longer, and was protected from pests. From the outside, the roof was golden; inside, it was black with soot. In winter, it held in the warmth, and in summer, it provided relief from the heat. For a peasant, the roof was a parasol, a blanket, and a natural thermos, all in one. Scientists studying preserved thatched roofs in English villages have found that some could last up to 50 years with regular maintenance. In the layers of straw, they even found traces of ancient soot, a kind of archive of the fires that had burned in the house over the centuries. And even the earth underfoot could become an ally in winter. The floors in the cottage were made of earth. During the day, they absorbed the heat from the hearth, and at night, they released it back. To prevent dampness from seeping in, peasants would lay down straw mats, wooden planks, or animal hides. It was pleasant to walk on such a floor. It was resilient, soft, and slightly springy. Children played on the coverings, and adults sat at their work without feeling the biting cold. The smell of earth, ash, and straw created a unique atmosphere. For us, heavy and sharp; for a peasant, familiar and comforting. Archaeologists excavating old huts have found multi-layered earthen floors mixed with ash. This means that peasants deliberately added ash to the floor. It retained heat and simultaneously repelled insects. The earth under their feet also worked in the owner's favor. It accepted the warmth and returned it when it was needed most. In a peasant hut, winter was felt with particular sharpness. But peasants devised an ingenious way to survive the cold. They shared their home with their animals. Many houses were long, so-called longhouses. People and livestock lived under one roof, the family in one half, and the cows, sheep, and pigs in the other. To us, this sounds like unimaginable unsanitary conditions. But for a peasant, it was a lifesaver. The heat generated by the animals was priceless. A single adult cow produced as much warmth as a small electric heater. Several animals turned the partition between the human and livestock areas into a veritable radiator. The wattle daub wall became warm to the touch. That's why peasants placed their beds right against this wall, to feel its gentle, even warmth at night. Furthermore, a thick layer of straw bedding lay under the animals. It was rarely changed in winter; fresh layers were simply added on top. The manure and urine, as they were absorbed, initiated a process of decomposition, a kind of compost heating. The bedding warmed the ground from below and, combined with the animal's body heat, turned the barn and the living quarters into a single, thermal system. Modern scientists have calculated that one cow can generate about 1,000 watts of heat. This is comparable to a modern space heater. In a longhouse with 3 to 4 animals, as much heat was produced as from several fireplaces. Yes, the smell of ammonia and smoke mingled, and the air was heavy. But peasants were used to this from childhood. For them, one thing was more important: surviving the frost. But warmth came not only from animals. It was also hidden in the very floor, underfoot. The main enemy in winter was the cold rising from the ground. It drew heat from the body faster than any wind. But peasants found a way to turn it into an ally. A thick layer of organic materials was spread on the earthen floor: straw, leaves, fern, reeds. The layer could be 40 to 50 centimeters thick, and it was renewed as winter set in. This floor was soft and springy. It was pleasant to walk on barefoot, even in winter. But the main process happened below. In the lower layers, a slow decomposition of organic matter began. Microorganisms worked like tiny furnaces, releasing heat. Thus, the cottage was heated from below. Archaeologists have found traces of such living floors in peasant homes throughout Europe. In the spring, peasants would clear out the old straw and decaying remains and take them to the fields. This produced valuable manure, rich in nitrogen. Thus, the floor served three functions: it provided warmth in winter, created a soft covering, and produced fertilizer. Of course, mice and fleas lived in the straw. But for a peasant, this was a lesser evil compared to the cold. Warmth and a good harvest were more important. But even with a warm floor and animals nearby, the cold could still creep in. Therefore, the final shield was clothing. A peasant's clothing was not just a covering for the body. It was a personal, heating device. A long linen shirt was worn against the bare skin. Linen was smooth, absorbed sweat, and didn't irritate the skin. Over it came woolen tunics, sometimes two. The wool was coarse and scratchy, but it was precisely what saved them in the frost. The secret of wool is in its structure. Each fiber is crimped and traps air. And air is the best insulator. Moreover, wool could absorb up to a third of its weight in moisture while still feeling dry to the touch. Crucially, the clothes were almost never washed. The natural grease in the wool, lanolin, was preserved. It made the fabric dense, water-repellent, and nearly windproof. Raindrops and snowflakes would roll off the surface rather than being absorbed. It was because of lanolin that peasants' clothing smelled of sheep and smoke, but thanks to this, it worked like a modern membrane, protecting against moisture and wind. A modern person would find it unpleasant, but for a peasant, it was perfection. Clothing was not even taken off at night. Only an outer cloak or shoes. The heat that the body accumulated during the day by the hearth was retained in the clothes and carried into bed. In this way, the peasants slept in their own personal microclimate. But sometimes even warm clothing wasn't enough. Then, clever methods were used to warm the bed. But sometimes even warm clothing wasn't enough. Then, clever methods were used to warm the bed. The most common method was a heated stone. It was placed in the ashes by the hearth, and in the evening, it was wrapped in cloth and hidden in the straw mattress. The stone gave off a dry, even heat for several hours. Sometimes it was placed at the feet to warm the most vulnerable spot. A more refined method was a ceramic pot with hot coals. It was covered with a lid and placed in the bed. The pot provided a gentle, long-lasting warmth without letting the coals accidentally fall out. Archaeologists have found such vessels in peasant dwellings. In different countries, they were called by different names: warmer, scalda. In England, they even used copper vessels with lids called bed warmers. These simple technologies turned a cold night's sleep into something tolerable and even cozy. But the most reliable source of heat was not things, but people. One could not survive the winter alone. Therefore, peasants banded together. On long, frosty nights, several families might gather in one cottage. This saved firewood. Instead of 3 hearths, only one would burn, and there was enough warmth for everyone. But most importantly, people warmed each other. Each person generated about 100 watts of heat. 20 people in a small hut turned it into a living heater. Their breathing made the air moist and feel warmer. In the evenings, women would spin, men would repair tools, and children would play. People sang songs, told stories, and shared food. This created not only physical warmth but also warmth of the soul. Some chronicles mention that during severe winters, even neighbors who lived alone were taken into families for the night so they wouldn't freeze by themselves. This was considered a matter of honor. No one should face the frost alone. Thus, the community became a true shield against the winter. The medieval winter was an ordeal. Frost, wind, long nights, all of these threatened a peasant no less than war or famine. But humanity found answers. They turned a fragile hut into an ally, taught the walls to breathe warmth, made smoke a protector, and the floor a source of life. They shared a roof with animals, turning them into living furnaces. They trusted the earth, which warmed from below. They wore wool and linen, turning clothing into a portable heater. They placed heated stones in their beds, hugged their children in the warm crowd of the family, and gathered neighbors in one house to stay warm together. To us, all of this may seem inconvenient, crude, and primitive. But therein lies the miracle: from nothing, from clay, straw, smoke, and the heat of bodies, they created an entire world in which it was possible to survive the most terrible frosts. In Old English villages, even in the 19th century, one could still find houses with earthen floors and thatched roofs where many of these techniques continued to be used. The traditions proved so resilient that they survived for centuries. And perhaps the main conclusion is that the peasants knew that the most reliable warmth is not fire or walls. The most reliable warmth is the warmth of a person sitting next to you. In the family, in the community, in the frost endured shoulder to shoulder. This is not just a story of survival. It is a story of human ingenuity, resilience, and unity. And maybe, in these forgotten techniques, lies an answer to our modern questions. After all, the ability to conserve warmth, to share it, and to find it in simple things, this is knowledge that does not lose its value, even over centuries.